I would probably say ever since I've been little, I've always had some sort of knack for the environment. My mom and dad were always very active in trying to get us to do some sort of outdoor activity. We also, in our church, have this group that we go on to a lot more extreme outdoor activities. I have been climbing up hills and mountains out in Glacier National Park. I've been spelunking in caves. My family's also big into fishing. I'm not the greatest. I don't have a lot of patience with fishing, but I have done it and it's been pretty okay. I also was for a while. I did skiing and snowshoeing as well. I've also been very interested in the natural history part of things. I love museums. I think they're the most fascinating things to go do, even though a lot of people don't like them, but I find them very fascinating, especially in the areas that have fossils. I would probably say generally, if you're a Wisconsinite, you almost are automatically glued to the environment in some form. I mean, if you just think about Wisconsin, the environment is one of the big things that come up. Agriculture, because we are the dairy state, but a lot of the other things, we have Lake Superior up north, Lake Michigan, we have our amazing forests. It's a very beautiful area. I'd probably say my environmental awareness started to come around maybe 7th grade, but it became more prominent in my 8th grade year when I did my project on John Muir, who is a very famous United States environmental activist. And I looked into a lot of other environmental issues. Of course, the big ones, plastic pollution, overuse of our natural resources, etc. And I came upon climate change. I knew a little bit about it, but I didn't really understand what it was. And after going to a lot of research about what is this issue, it started to really impact me and really start to see how our world has been treated. And it's almost consistent. Almost every day I have to wake up knowing what's going on our planet and how little time we have left to change that. And it's not because I just want to keep thinking about climate change, it's because it's consistent in the news. We usually always see things that are constantly breaking record, especially in the United States for the summer. We see the East Coast being hit by hurricanes, we see the West Coast being hit by wildfires, and of course the big statistics that come out every year where they constantly say we have fewer years to do something about it. More ice is melting in the Arctic. Polar bears are starting to become more endangered. More species are going to go extinct or already are extinct. But something that's always consistent as I keep looking through a lot of this research is what's going to happen to my area, the Midwest. When I see a lot of these things about climate change, they usually don't focus on my own area, my hometown. They're usually somewhere very far away. I mean, looking outside, we're not seeing very drastic changes. We do get temperature record hits, but that's basically that. So I decided this year to understand what is happening or could in the future happen to the Midwest. From reading studies to talking with professionals in polar fields, I am searching for an answer to this crucial question. By the end, I hope that I and you will gain a conception about the relationship of climate change and our heartland. So to start off with, what is climate change exactly, and what makes this one different? Well, natural climate changes have occurred multiple times in Earth's history. It happens due to the alteration of the solar activity that reaches the Earth due to the constant movement of the planet's axis. Most recently, our climates have changed from the frigid cold of the Ice Age to a stable, warm temperature. Then, in the late 18th century, something drastic happened. The Industrial Revolution. Humans transferred their main source of energy of manpower, domestic animals, wood, water from water wheels, and air from windmills to fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are things like coal, oil, and natural gas that are essentially tightly compressed plants from around 300 million years ago. Fossil fuels had completely changed how the world works and increased productivity beyond imagination. However, This source of energy does something else besides heat your house. It emits carbon dioxide. When we burn these materials, all of that carbon that was stored in those ancient plants is released into the atmosphere. Although in small amounts it doesn't do much, when a chemical is released to the extent we have, it will. Since the start of the Industrial Revolution, humans have pumped 416 parts per million of CO2, and it has resulted into a global greenhouse effect. Basically, the excess heat the sun emits is being trapped by the gas like a blanket and therefore warming up our planet. Since 1880, the Earth has warmed 2.1 degrees Fahrenheit. This number doesn't seem like a lot, but it is. Due to this rise in temperature, clouds are absorbing more water, which is causing extreme events like droughts, wildfires, floods, and hurricanes to be more frequent and dangerous. But what about the Midwest? Just like the rest of the world, America's heartland has changed. From 1900 to 2010, the average air temperature increase has been greater than 1.5 degrees and has accelerated in recent decades. Some southern Midwest states are experiencing more days over 95 degrees and fewer below 65 degrees. With this increase, the eastern Midwest is seeing greater annual precipitation, with some areas rising by 20%. Overall, our seasons have changed. The winter and spring are experiencing more precipitation, while the summer is a lot drier, especially in the southern part of the Midwest. So, how is this important? Well, we can start off with the most obvious, the Midwest's environment. Species around the world are already noticing this warmer change in temperature. In the Midwest, migratory birds are arriving sooner and plants are blooming sooner than they did 40 years ago. Compared to data from 1935 to 1945, a third of them are arriving 2 to 3 weeks earlier. For example, Canadian geese are arriving 29 days earlier, while butterfly weeds are arriving 18 days earlier. While some species, like the Canadian geese and the butterfly weed, are reacting to this change in temperature, others are not. To get a better understanding of this, in February, I went and talked with Chris Sanford, the naturalist at the DC Everest Twin Oaks.
So my first question for you is, how would the Midwest environment, specifically Wisconsin's, and biodiversity be affected by warming temperatures?
There's two big things. Most of it is focused on having more earlier springs and having more intense dry periods during the summer. The biggest change that we've seen in Wisconsin is gradual temperature increases, about 2 degrees, give or take. That doesn't seem like much, but what that results in is much earlier spring, which means the snow is going to either thaw a lot sooner or will have a whole lot less. And on the other side of the spectrum, we are having more intense drought seasons in Wisconsin. Now, in Wisconsin, we do have some times where they do get dry. That's normal. The problem is it's happening more and it's happening for a lot longer. Why is the early thaw a bad thing? There's a lot of animals in Wisconsin, both plants and wildlife, that really depend on temperature in order for certain important parts of their ecology. For example, there are many migratory birds whose instincts are triggered more by temperature than time of day. Another big thing is plants. Certain plants and flowers will be triggered by temperature to start opening up their buds. The problem with that is a lot of the insects they depend on for pollination won't be back yet, which means we could be seeing a big decline that way.
Another aspect of warming temperatures is an increase in invasive species. Already, our forests are being devastated by them. For my state of Wisconsin, almost half of its total acreage is covered by trees, providing 16 million acres of forest for timber, recreation, wildlife habitat, and ecosystem services such as cleaning the air and water. Invasive species like the gypsy moth, the emerald ash borer, the hemlock woolly aldrich, and the beech bark completely wipe out hundreds of millions of acres of trees yearly.
For instance, the gypsy moth infests 125 million acres of U.S. forests and costs us 10.6 million each year in efforts to suppress it.
As far as other animal species go, particularly animals such as porcupines, the forests that they depend on, which are mostly hemlock forests, they really rely on wet, damp soils. If those soils become more hotter and drier as time goes by, those forests, which are mostly in northern Wisconsin, they can tend to suffer and dry up, which takes away a porcupine's big food supply, which means now we have species that are being affected not just by porcupines, but by the animals that hunt them, such as fishers, a porcupine's only natural predator. They might have a field day at first, but eventually they'll run out of food to eat, which will result in their populations being lower. As well as animals that depend on the snow and the cover it provides to help them survive. Snowshoe hares, for example, their entire name and identity and design is based around a winter habitat. Their coat changes, which would normally change to white during the winter months, becomes useless when hiding from predators. Another thing could be also said for their big predators, which are weasels. Weasels during the winter time will also change their fur coats as well, and they depend on the snow not just to help blend in, but they also serve that as their winter homes. So all of a sudden now they're stuck out in the cold, and they are much more likely to be preyed upon. The thing that not a whole lot of people realize about any ecosystem, not just in Wisconsin, is that every living creature in it is tied to one another in even the smallest ways. And it's a lot more fragile than it would appear. You take away one particular prey animal, you have to think of, okay, what would happen to not only the food that that prey animal would eat, but what would also eat it in turn. One animal that's actually standing to benefit from climate change around here is actually white-tailed deer. With snow thawing a lot earlier, that means that there's more stuff for them to browse and then to eat. That has two effects. The first is their own population may explode as a result, but the other effect is that the plants that they might eat and nibble on could be getting taken out earlier, which means less food for everything else to go on. Another big thing to think about is the fish population in Wisconsin. One of the things that we're known for is our trout fishing. Trout are extremely sensitive animals. They will actually only breed within a very specific temperature range.
To understand more how fish are being impacted by climate change, I went and talked with Frank Pratt, a retired fisheries biologist from the DNR. So based on the warming that has already happened over the past 100 years, especially like with the temperatures warming by a couple degrees, how are these numbers significant to the natural ecosystems?
Okay, these numbers are, and that's a 2-degree change that's basically occurred since about 1980. So in the last 50 years or so, we've gained 2 degrees in average seasonal water temperature. This means that certain species that really thrive in cold water, species like brook trout, whitefish, cisco, lake trout, to an extent brown trout, northern pike, and some of the cool water fish like walleye are not faring as well as they used to, because they are encountering water temperatures, at least for part of the growing season, which is pretty much at their tolerance limits, if not lethal. So it's really restricted the range, the abundance, and the distribution of many of the cold water and cool water species already. And we're forecasting anywhere from a 2 to 9 degree change over the next century if climate change continues. So that is not good news for the cold water, cool water species. The nature of our fisheries has changed a lot in terms of species composition. And it's probably not going to switch back to what it was. When I first came to Wisconsin in 1974, the premier game fish species here were, particularly in northern Wisconsin, was the walleye. That's what most anglers wanted. And a large number of our lakes and our streams, they were the dominant predator species. That's completely changed. Walleye are, I hesitate to say, on their way out, because there are going to be a relatively small number of waters, but a few waters where they're probably going to hang on. But their abundance has really crashed under climate change. And I don't think they're coming back. On the other hand, the sunfish, which would include the black bass, largemouth and smallmouth, and a lot of our favorite panfish species like bluegill, pumpkin seed, black crappie, they are thriving. They're absolutely thriving. A longer growing season benefits them. Warmer water temperatures benefit them. More eutrophic waters with more weeds, more phytoplankton, more productivity benefit them. We're probably looking at the heyday of bass and panfish fishing in Wisconsin. So basically what we see to this date has been a shift away from the cold water, cool water species to those species that are considered to be purely warm water species. On the land, environmental conditions and atmospheric carbon conditions. For example, one of the things that's going on right now due to climate change is our patterns of precipitation have completely, totally changed here in northern Wisconsin. We're getting about the same amount of precipitation on an annual basis, but a lot less is coming as snow melt right now. A lot more is coming as summer rain, and the most problematical part of that is these are summer rains that are coming in these gigantic superstorms, 10, 11 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. And our watersheds are just not built to withstand that type of deluge. And then if you add on top of that a lot of agriculture, a lot of impervious surfaces, a lot of human development, you have tremendous amounts of soil erosion and runoff that go with that, and then you have nutrient problems that go along with that, and you've got one problem aggravating the other.
Additionally to warmer water temperatures, our lakes and rivers and the aquatic species that live in them are being affected by a reduction in ice coverage. Coverage regulates the water's temperature, the light penetration, and the dissolved oxygen levels, and other ecological parameters that govern the growth and the reproduction of species and interspecies relationships. In addition to this, winds are making contact with lake waters, which are disturbing fish nesting sites and impacting the ways lakes stratify. So as we can see, the Midwest ecosystems have changed. We are seeing a dramatic shift between cold weather to warm weather species. And as the winter is so essential into the Midwest, the change is exceptional. But that's just a very narrow view of how significant our environment is to the Midwest. So let's change it up. Let's change from environment to species to something else. Environment to business. The Midwest economy represents 18% of U.S. gross domestic product, or GDP. A significant portion of that comes from natural resources, such as tourism, outdoor recreation, forest products, Great Lake shipping, agriculture, and water-intensive manufacturing. As climate change directly impacts the environment, so is it disturbing our economy. First off, manufacturing. When at first thought, climate change doesn't come up with big business. If it's anything, the opposite. But actually, it is being impacted by climate change because of natural disasters. When we usually think of these occurrences, we are likely reminded of the personal impacts such as town destruction, injuries, and death. As climate change is causing an increase in these disasters, our industries are seeing an increase in property damage, travel delays, and disruption in services. Billion-dollar floods in the Midwest have occurred 3 times in the last quarter century. During the floods of May 2017, more than 400 state roads in Missouri were closed, including several stretches of Interstate 44. In 2009, a study from the University of Illinois documents that flooding in 2008 caused damage to railways in the state and adjacent states, with costs more than $150 million due to direct damage and lost revenue. Not only does it affect land-based transportation, it also does to water-based. Major river systems like the Ohio, the Upper Mississippi, and Missouri are huge business channels, as well as the Great Lakes. For example, in April and May of 2011, a combination of heavy rain and rapid melting snow caused a flood that closed the Mississippi River to navigation and caused billions of dollars in damage downstream. Later in the spring, an identical occurrence happened upstream throughout the Missouri River and resulted in the same way. These floods cost $85 million in direct damages along the Missouri River, with the most extensive property damage and crop loss between Sioux City and Council Bluffs. For the Mississippi River, navigation was halted by flooding in 2013, 2015, 2016, and 2017. On the other hand, low rivers in 2012 and 2014 also caused disruptions. Furthermore, our manufacturing is being impacted by these tremendous natural disasters. As previously stated in the Midwest environment, our trees are being impacted by climate change, therefore hurting our forest products. Tree products generate $122 billion each year. If you include recreational services to Wisconsin's economy, it totals up to $2.5 billion. This is only being aggravated by human activities like logging, fire suppression, and agriculture expansion, which lowers diversity even more so from pre-Euro-American settlement. As we are seeing a switch from cool to warm water species, we are seeing a decline in paper birch, quaking aspen, and balsam fir, and an increase in oak, hickory, and pine. These cool species are important to our economy and our daily lives. For example, the paper birch provides plywood and pulpwood and helps treat dysentery and various blood diseases. Additionally, the Midwest offers great opportunities for outdoor recreation. We provide national parks like the Voyageurs, the Ice Age Trail, and the Apostle Islands. Midwest states' GDP averages at 2% of its economy for outdoor recreation. What really makes our outdoor recreation well known is the variety of winter activities. My own local area of central Wisconsin provides numerous things like sledding, both downhill and cross-country skiing, ice fishing, snowshoeing, and snowmobiling. As fossil fuels are warming up our planet, our winters are becoming milder and shorter. Hence, our winter activities are being hit the most. To hear more about this, I talked with Ben Popp, the executive director of the American Birkebeiner Association, which is North America's largest cross-country ski race. So my first question I want to ask you is, how would warming affect your industry, including employees, the community, partnerships, consumers, etc.?
I mean, if we ask ourselves, how does warming affect our industry, our community, everything that we do, it's the short answer is really quite significant. I've been the director of the foundation since 2013, and even in that period, we've had to cancel the race once because there was no snow. And cancel a single race, it has the effects are so profound beyond that. It's not just about a single race, because in the case of the Birkebeiner and the foundation in the region, the economic impact is well over $15 million a year. And a lot of that isn't just because of the event, of course. It's because people find the love of coming to the area. The event often, they discover the area because of the event. They get drawn in, a buddy or something gets them there, and then they fall in love with the region, the sport. And so by not having the event, is not just that singular event that we lose all those experiences and interactions with people coming to visit. And then what happens is you get this profound snowball effect after that. People often come and they fall in love with the area, they buy a second home, or they come back many times throughout the year. We survey our participants, and over 80% will come back and visit the area at least one more time in a different season. And so we know that the economic impact is just really profound. And so by canceling the event or having low snow years, which is often happening, or we get snow and it melts, we're not able to then also groom the ski trail. So all these weekends in the middle of the winter when visitors come to try skiing or to come out and utilize the outdoor facilities that we have, and we can't offer that, there's just a really huge economic impact on our local community. And then it starts to extend even further in that. So if we have to cancel events or we don't collect as much trail pass fees, or those things, because we don't have as many users, because we can't provide that experience, then suddenly we aren't able to hire as many people. We have a staff of nearly 20. And so that's pretty significant when in a small community, when you have a staff that suddenly, if you're not able to pay them, now we're starting to impact more and more. Oftentimes people say the tourist dollar gets spent 7 times within the community. So one of the interesting facts that I like to point to is we as an organization, most of our money, or a lot of our money, comes from outside a radius of 50 miles because we're rural here. Even though we have great support of local sponsors and local folks, just by sheer volume of people where they're coming from, the money often trickles into that circle. And a huge majority of that money gets then spent in the circle. As we see the climate changing and the globe warming, the effects of not having as much snow or having really, really profound summer events, weather events that really impact the trail, because the trail is really central to what we're offering and what brings people here. It's the natural resource that everybody wants to come see. So, unfortunately, by not being able to provide some of that, the economic impact becomes really significant. As things change and evolve, certainly we as an organization try and change, like whether it's making snow or whether it's trying to make sure that the corridors are cleared farther. So if we do have windstorms more often, if trees fall, there's more room, making sure that the tread, as we call it, on the trails is more resilient to heavy rains and better runoff. We can do all those things, but all those things also require investment, and we're happy, I think, to make those investments. But when we do, that means we invest some less somewhere else. And so if we're investing more in tread, maybe that means we're doing less in youth programming. If we're investing more in snowmaking, that means less in what the event experience is that maybe isn't quite as good. And so I think all of the weather and climate as it evolves, certainly we too will try and evolve with it, but also know that means we're compromising other places that we might otherwise not want to.
How big of a significance is Birkebeiner to your community and to just like the whole area in general?
When we think about what does the Birkebeiner mean for a small community in northwestern Wisconsin, it really is quite significant. And what happens with the events is the ability as it grows in visibility through the event itself, we see that then really impacts also these other tourism areas, not just even skiing. So for instance, the Birkebeiner was part of the Super Bowl Live in 2018. The Super Bowl was in Minneapolis. The NFL said, hey, we really want to provide this bold North experience for all these millions of people that are coming to Minneapolis to watch a Super Bowl and around the world. Long story short, we ended up moving this. We have this wooden bridge that we put up as part of the event that skiers go up and over and skiing into downtown Main Street of Hayward. And so we loaded it up on 18 semis and drove it down to downtown Minneapolis and set it up and put snow on it. And all week long, it was NBC's booth was up on top of it. And so all week long, it was the centerpiece of the second most viewed sporting event around the world. And so it really put skiing in Hayward in northern Wisconsin. What is this huge bridge and what are we on top of? And celebrities skied up and down it, and it really brought visibility to our region. And that would have never happened if we didn't have this event, which then created this bridge, which then gave us this opportunity to bring Hayward into downtown Minneapolis and around the world as part of the Super Bowl, which is really obviously much more mainstream than cross-country skiing. But the other thing that I think we often overlook is by creating all this infrastructure for people that want to come and visit, it also provides opportunities for people that live here. So when we create a new trail segment or an outdoor community building that we're using for the event, although it might get used for an event for 2 or 3 days of the year, but then the other 362 days of the year, it gets used by the local community. And so it really starts to provide, I think, some really great outdoor opportunities and resources for people that like to recreate outside, which by nature, if you live in northern Wisconsin, oftentimes you like to recreate outside. So it really starts to create some opportunities for folks that might not otherwise be able to. So I think
Another industry that is being impacted by climate change is something that defines the Midwest: farming. Midwest agriculture makes up 2/3 of the region's land area and produces 65% of the nation's corn and soybeans. For my state, research from UW-Madison and UW Extensions find that Wisconsin farms and agricultural businesses generate nearly $60 billion in economic activity and employ 353,991 people. In other words, 10% of the Wisconsin's workforce. Over half of all Wisconsin farms are small scale, meaning under 100 acres, spanning diverse agroecological zones. Because of increasing temperatures, our agriculture is being significantly impacted. Although in the short term CO2 helps boost photosynthesis, it does other things as well. Corn yields are declining as temperature increases because of the shortening of the reproductive development period. In some rural parts of Wisconsin, ozone levels are high enough to reduce yields of soybeans and winter wheat. Hotter temperatures also stresses livestock and furthermore causes a decline in meat, milk, and egg production. To get a personal glimpse into how climate change is impacting farmers, I went and talked with Tenzin Botsford. Him and his wife own and operate Red Door Family Farms in Athens, Wisconsin, and primarily cultivate fruits and vegetables with some poultry and pork. So my first question to you is, how would warming temperatures affect your industry, such as workers, employees, consumers, your community?
Yeah. So warming temperatures have affected our industry in a lot of ways. The biggest one by far, and what keeps coming up at every different veggie growers conference and thing like that we go to, is weather patterns. So obviously warming temperatures creates bigger rain events where we get more rain in a shorter period of time, and it's sort of just more volatile. So it makes it much more difficult to plan around. We're getting 100-year weather events year after year after year in a lot of communities. So that's by far the biggest challenge. Along with that come things like supply chain disruptions and possible crop contamination. So anytime you have surface water flooding a field, none of that, even if you get those things to finish out and be harvestable, they're condemned because you've now had surface water contamination, so they're not considered safe to sell, which is, I think, smart, but I think a lot of people don't realize that a flooded field can mean that not only can it be a challenge to growing and to resource conservation, but it also can just annihilate a crop. Those are sort of the big things, but by far, I think, the biggest problem is rain events. So we're getting, occasionally we get drier spells than we normally do here in the Midwest, and that's a challenge, but that's a relatively easy challenge to work around for farmers. You can add water, but you can't take it away in most cases. And I know the Madison area has been hit really hard, not so much this past season, but the 2 previous summers, they had just tons and tons of flooding down there. I saw pictures of tomato plants this tall that were halfway underwater. Just heart-wrenching stuff. And it's really hard to farm, obviously, in those conditions, and it's hard enough to keep a farm viable, let alone when you've got to weather those sorts of storms. But it also further creates problems with erosion and soil depletion, nutrient depletion, which build and make longer term problems and affect your fertility.
Like with warmer temperatures, we're going to see more pest and disease growth. How would that affect the farming industry?
Yeah, that's very much true. And I would say, to a lesser, it's less of an immediate threat than the severe weather patterns, but it's also ongoing. We are already seeing an increase in invasive pests that can overwinter. For us to control for pests in the high tunnels, what we do is we just open the sides for a week or 2 in February and freeze it out really hard, and that seems to negate pest pressure, but that's becoming less and less possible. And this last year we had a huge problem with cabbage moths, which aren't new to the area, but they weren't able to overwinter in the sorts of populations that we saw this last year because we had a milder winter last year.
We can conclude that climate change is not just about the environment, it's about our industries. It's impacting our agriculture to our manufacturing. The assumption that big business benefits from its impacts on the environment is false. It's instead detrimental. And as climate change is impacting our industries, so is it impacting our own personal lives. It's increasing our taxes. Our needs like shelter and food are becoming destroyed, and our favorite activities are becoming more and more scarce. But climate change impacts us in an even more personal way, our own human health. The Midwest is home to 61 million people, the majority of which live in cities. To discuss more on the health impacts of climate change, I went and talked with Bruce Craywes. Bruce is a retired pathologist who now works at Marshfield Clinic researching climate change and its impacts on human health.
Okay, so for my first question, how would the average Midwestern person be affected by climate change or already is?
The most important thing for people to remember is that climate change is the most important health problem of this century. More people, I think, will get sick and will die from climate change than will get sick and die from, say, cancer or heart disease or the other things that are common causes of death right now. And there was a very large group of experts on climate that were put together into a panel that was called the Lancet Panel on Climate Change. That is a medical journal. And these experts were the ones who said that climate change is the greatest health problem of this century. So it's not my idea, it's a group of public health experts known as the Lancet Commission on Climate Change.
Increasing temperatures mean a rise in heat waves. Extreme heat kills more people in the U.S. than any other weather-related disaster. In recent decades, hundreds of people in the Midwest have been killed by them yearly.
It will be hotter, and the heat will cause problems for outdoor workers. When a person is out in really hot weather for a long time, and by really hot, I mean hotter than 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And we will see those temperatures more and more. So if you're outside and it's hotter than 95 degrees, then some people will lose their temperature regulation and they will develop what is often called heat stroke. And children are more susceptible to heat stroke than adults. And elderly people are more susceptible to heat stroke than younger adults. And outdoor workers are more susceptible to heat stroke than people who are in the shade. That will be a problem for us as people who have to work outdoors in the sun in hot weather may develop hyperthermia or heat stroke.
Another group of people that are more vulnerable to heat waves are people of color and people in low-income communities. These groups of people are more exposed to air pollution and extreme heat at higher rates. This is because their communities have more paved surfaces than they do parks, trees, in general, green spaces. They also have less access to air conditioning, relief from the heat, and medical care. Therefore, they have an increased risk to heat stroke.
If we talk about vectors of disease, the biggest one in the Midwest, I think, would be expected to be Lyme disease. Lyme disease is an infection carried by ticks, and it's an infection with a particular bacteria that's called Borrelia. And the Borrelia bacteria is transferred from the tick to a human when the human receives a tick bite. And ticks are quite sensitive to weather. They are unable to operate very well in cold climates. So as the temperatures of the Midwest warm, then the time during which people can get Lyme disease will increase, and probably the number of cases of Lyme disease will increase. It used to be before 2000 that Canada was too cold for Lyme disease. The only time there was Lyme disease in Canada was when somebody from Canada went south and was bitten, say in the United States or say in Southern Europe or something. As the climate warms, the ticks were able to move north into Canada, and there's a mouse that the ticks get the bacteria from, and the mice also migrated north, so that now Lyme disease is a disease that occurs in Canada. And another problem that we will face in the Midwest is clean drinking water. Right now, there are quite a few threats to drinking water. One is called a toxic bloom. A toxic bloom is when water becomes warmer and then it becomes contaminated with runoff from rainfall that has gone through fields where the water may have picked up manure or fertilizer. And what happens in that case is that there's an explosion of growth of microorganisms. This causes all of the oxygen in the water to be used up by the bacteria, and it also makes the water unfit for drinking or unfit for swimming.
For more on this disease, we go back to Frank Pratt.
If I was on a lake, for example, where there was a blue-green algae bloom going on, I would not let my children swim there. I would certainly not let my dog drink the lake water because there are wickedly strong neurotoxins which can put you into severe neurological problems and even respiratory arrest at very small concentrations. It seems like we have increasing instances of people who allow their dogs to go down and lap up the lake water when there's a blue-green algae bloom going, and the dog just plain collapses and dies.
One place that is already being hit by waterborne diseases is the Great Lakes. These fresh waters contain 84% of North America's surface water, which supplies drinking water to 40 million people. During August of 2014, an algae bloom in Lake Erie prompted the city of Toledo to ban drinking and cooking with tap water. This eruption in blue-green algae did not just happen once. It has happened multiple times and continues to do so. It has happened so much that it's common for residents to just turn off their water supply because it's so toxic. These two diseases are not the only ones increasing due to climate change. There is a long list of waterborne and vector-borne diseases that are also increasing. Additionally, warmer seasons mean an increase in the length and severity of the pollen season. As we all know, spring means mating and birth, but not just to animals, to plants too. Some plants, like the notorious ragweed, emit pollen. Some people, like myself, can't handle the degree that it emits and have seasonal allergies. Well, as climate change continues, this season becomes longer and hence emits more pollen than usual. Already, in Madison and La Crosse, the ragweed season is 2 weeks longer than what it was in 1995. Because of this lengthening of the pollen season, more people are having seasonal allergies, and people that already have seasonal allergies, their symptoms are becoming more severe. Then, there's the most obvious health concern due to climate change: air pollution. When we burn these materials, we are emitting carbon dioxide into our atmosphere, which is making our air supply spoiled. In 2018, 41.9 million Americans, or 13% of the nation's population, had ever been diagnosed with asthma by a health professional. This was an increase of 43% from 9.1% in 1999. Inhaling these particles, especially in a fire situation, can lead to a broad range of adverse health effects, like lung cancer, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, and cardiovascular disease. Every year, 7 million die prematurely worldwide from air pollution.
Mental health problems are an aspect of climate change. They're going to affect people worldwide. When people are affected by natural disasters, then they may lose their job or their home or their health. And so this causes increased mental health problems.
To sum up, the average Midwestern person's health is being impacted by climate change. We are seeing a tremendous rise in heat wave deaths, cases of waterborne and vector-borne diseases, cases of allergies and asthma, and air pollution health-related concerns. In summary, the Midwest is being impacted by climate change. By burning these materials, we are seeing disruptions to our environment, our industries, and our own health. Everything discussed prior is all happening in the present. So, if we continued doing the things that we usually do by burning these materials as our main source of energy, what would our futures look like? What would the Midwest look like by the end of the century, perhaps? I asked this question to the people I interviewed, and the answers I got were not exciting.
20 on 100. Well, once again, I'd like to reiterate that a lot of this is based on what information we have as far as speculation goes. This is obviously a prediction, and predictions can often go awry. But if we were to look that far in the head, the numbers that I've seen, I recently looked at a study that was done in 2011, which projected that by the year 2050, we'd be looking at a temperature increase in the state between 6 to 11 degrees. Unfortunately, there aren't a whole lot of models that would usually predict 100 years into the future, just because climate can change so quickly. But if we were to go based off of that study, and most seem to be predicting right within that range, we can probably expect Wisconsin temperatures to increase between 12 and 20 degrees Fahrenheit if that particular model holds.
This increase in temperature means that each area's climate will change. Researchers from the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Sciences created a map that showed how each area would look by the year 2080. For example, my area of Wausau, Wisconsin would feel like Ottumwa, Iowa.
As for what that will do to our ecosystem and potentially our economy, think back to what I said earlier about the certain species that were affected. We can expect to see a much greater impact, and with temperature changes that drastic over so short of a period of time, we can expect other species to be nailed by that as well. Not just creatures who are temperature sensitive, but creatures you wouldn't necessarily think of. Think, for example, animals that hibernate, such as bears or woodchucks. All of a sudden, the fat buildup that they have becomes useless during the winter months, which could lead to a big detriment on their part. The big reason why climate change is so hard on wildlife than it is for people is that all wildlife is defined by its ability to react and adapt to their environment. That's what evolution is at the end of the day. Now, in a normal situation, the planet's temperature would be eventually changing, and who knows, one day we might in fact do have a period where our temperatures could get this high. The problem is the environment is changing faster than these animals can adapt to it.
So if we keep going in this direction, by the end of the century, what does it look like for farming in the Midwest? Well, this is a great opportunity to use one of my favorite quotes. Wise man I was fortunate enough to know well at a young age, named Reuben Snake, once told me that if we don't change direction, we're going to wind up where we're headed. And I think that that's exactly right. I think that by the end of the century, and quite frankly, I don't think I can even see that far ahead. I think way sooner than that. I think within my lifetime, certainly within my children's lifetime, which hopefully they do live to see the end of the century here. But I think we're going to see very volatile weather patterns that leave farming in the Midwest to be a non-starter. I think that farming as it is now is already, it's like the most wholesome gambling addiction you can have. And that's even with things being as currently stable as they are, and we're already seeing things getting more and more volatile at a shocking rate. So I would say in the next 20 years, it will be devastating financially if we don't change policies to promote good practices and better insulate farms that aren't doing just sort of the main big things. Those farms, those crop insurance programs are financially very workable for farms. They keep them kind of stuck in debt, but they do keep them operating, and for the most part. But for farms like ours, there is no real crop insurance program that will continue. So we have to rely on being adaptable and having our ducks in a row that way, and having our income be diverse by having many different crops, for example, that come in at different times and things like that. And so I don't see anyone being willing to start a farm like ours even 25 years from now unless things change significantly climatically, or in terms of the market, in terms of policy, or technologically. Old farms that are in the habit of waking up and starting again every spring will continue to do that in many cases, but there will be a lot of consolidation because smaller farms just will not be able to weather the ups and downs, and that will leave all that land available to larger farms. The bigger the farms are, the less responsibly they're farmed. I mean, there's other factors, but that trend basically holds because it's just more land that can't be managed with nuances.
As previously stated, the Great Lakes are already being impacted by algae blooms, but another way it could be impacted is our shipping. UW-Madison researcher John Magnuson predicts that a combination of these lower ups and downs and climate change impacts would result in lower levels every 15 to 25 years and less frequent higher years. For instance, it is predicted that Lake Michigan's water levels would drop by 1 to 2 feet over the next century.
A ship's draft, or the distance between the water line and the bottom of its main body, determines both the minimum depth of water it can safely sail and the maximum height of cargo it can carry. For every inch of lost draft, a 700-foot vessel loses 100 tons of capacity and a 1,000-foot vessel loses 270 tons.
Researcher Harry Caldwell and colleagues predict that Great Lakes shipping could increase as much as 30% due to the number of trips needed and light loading.
Currently, the federal government maintains a 27 depth in these channels, but dredging projects greater than 27 feet require authorization by Congress.
Hydrologist Frank Quinn predicts that these lower levels will be inadequate within 20 years for many channels, requiring deeper dredging. Dredging in the Great Lakes may be complicated by the presence of toxic contaminants in the sediments from decades-old industrial waste. As wind strength increases and ice coverage decreases, our lake beds and shorelines are vulnerable to erosion, which would mean destruction to our ports and docks. However, these predictions on shipping productivity would also be influenced by a decrease in ice coverage. Quinn predicts that the shipping season may be 1 to 3 months longer, and costs may decrease as ice coverage expenses decrease.
The consequences would be very severe. Another problem that, as far as I know, we haven't seen yet in the United States, but is happening in tropical countries to outdoor workers, is called heat-related kidney disease. And if people work in really hot weather for a long time, they develop a form of kidney disease. And we don't really know yet what the cause is. It's relatively new, and it's been described in India and in Sri Lanka and in Central America and in the northern part of South America. And these are people who work every day in a hot, sunny environment. And once a person develops this disease, they will progress oftentimes to renal failure and to death. And it's estimated from studies that about 20,000 people have died from heat-related kidney disease since about the year 1990. And this disease, as far as we know, didn't even exist before 1980. Now, of course, there could have been some cases that we didn't notice. But heat-related kidney disease is something that's relatively new. The only thing that really the people have in common is that they are young, healthy people, and they work outdoors in the sun every day. And if you do that for about 2 years, then you have a risk of developing heat-related kidney disease. And so possibly as the Midwest gets hotter, we will see this in the Midwest.
Then there was something also that Bruce said that really took me off guard.
The United States Army did a study of climate change, and this was done at an organization that is called the Army War College. It is where the Army studies future military problems. If you just look at the very first one, it says that there will be forced migration of tens of millions of people. This is what the Army predicts if we do not address global warming. So it might be that tens of millions of people will be forced to migrate from where they live now because those places will no longer be inhabitable. In the Midwest, we will most likely become a center where people will have to migrate to along the coast of the United States. Where sea level rise is occurring, people will be displaced and they may have to come to the Midwest, particularly in the United States. New Orleans, Miami, Charleston, South Carolina, New York, and Boston are examples of large cities threatened by sea level rise. Also in the United States, some of the southern states may become very hot and more difficult to inhabit, so that people may choose to leave, say, Texas or Arizona or Louisiana or Mississippi. Louisiana and Mississippi will not only become hotter, but they will also experience sea level rise. So people within the United States may be forced to move away from where they live now, and they may choose to move to the Midwest. And then we will have to accommodate them.
Now, this mass migration to the Midwest does not just include U.S. cities. It can include the world as well. Across the globe, we are already seeing mass migrations. For instance, Central Australia is no longer habitable during the summer because the heat is so intense. For Indonesia, they are abandoning their capital of Jakarta because it's basically sinking. Other places around the world are already following in their footsteps, such as North Africa and the Middle East. The Midwest, physically, isn't being that much impacted, and if you include those coastal cities, we are going to have a lot of people that could be coming to our area, and we are going to, like Bruce said, accommodate them. Now, this is just an example of the most likely places that will be coming to the Midwest. But if climate change continues, that could mean a lot of other places too.
Climate change is not just about Greenland, Venice, Australia, and Miami. It's about extreme heat, heavy downpours, and flooding and droughts that are affecting our daily lives. Everything that has already happened to the Midwest will only become worse. There'll be more of these weather events. There'll be more displacement, more diseases, more death, more extinctions, and these will only increase in severity. Our actions in spreading these pollutants have resulted into a total catastrophe that could lead to an inhabitable Earth. This is the Midwest now. It can't change back to the lush forests of yesterday. The damage is already done. The future is a dystopia. The Midwest is broken. But that doesn't mean it can't be fixed. We can change this. If by 2032 we cut our emissions by 50% and then 100% by 2050 to stay below 1.5 degrees or at least 2 degrees Celsius, our planet will be saved. The Midwest will be saved. We will be able to stop where we are now and completely avoid that total catastrophe. Although this would be a tremendous effort, which is a complete understatement for the things we would have to do in order to do this, we can't delay it anymore, and we can't question it anymore. We need to stop thinking about climate change as a distant future. It's happening here, and it's happening now. Every day, every hour, every second that passes means that that window is getting wider and wider. We need to change.
My personal moral value set values the common good, not just in real time, not just of everybody else in my community, but in particular those that have no voice, and that would be future generations. I want to see a world where my great-granddaughter can at least touch or look at a brook trout and see how beautiful it is, rather than have to worry about whether she's even going to be able to survive from day to day on this planet.
I want to be doing something that has at least the potential to be meaningful in a long-term way. And because I have kids, and as we talked about, 25, 50 years from now, farming in the Midwest is not viable. I don't want to have to look at them and say that I was part of the problem and I knew better and I did it wrong anymore.
And then from a personal side, obviously, growing up in northern Wisconsin and just loving the outdoors and everything that comes with it, it's sad to see that have to change. I think we as humans are impacting that, and those are decisions we're making, and be right or be wrong. I think now is the time to really look at ourselves and say, you know what, we're okay with that change, so we're going to keep doing what we're doing. Or say, you know what, gosh, that change maybe isn't really what was intended or hoped. Right? We can't just look at surface and say, well, bummer, that event was canceled. They can't come and ski here. Oh, there's no snow this weekend. That's too bad. You know, visitors will come next weekend. When you really dive into what does that really mean, well, it means that we couldn't go skiing this weekend, but it also means a bunch of people didn't come and visit. It means they didn't go to a restaurant. It means they didn't stay in a hotel. It means they didn't go buy something at the gift shop. It means they didn't go buy something at the grocery store. So the effect is compounding over time when you realize what that means when you can't utilize the outdoor activity that requires a certain historical type of climate.
Many of the things that we can do are small. Changes can be made incrementally. It probably won't be fast enough, but most of those things are going to improve your long-term fertility, improve the health of your soil, improve the health of your farm, improve your long-term financial viability, even if it comes at a short-term cost in terms of time and money. So I think long-term, agronomically speaking, these are sound investments. And we tend to think that ecological justice or ecological improvement comes at the expense of the economy. And that's just a mindset that's been kind of cooked into our heads. It doesn't have to be that way. There are very real, tangible things that we can do to promote good practices, both economically and ecologically, within our community.
In November of 2015, while I was thinking about retirement, the first study from the Lancet Climate Change Commission came out. And when I read this, I was actually shocked because I did not realize it. And here, a panel of experts, world experts on public health, were saying this is the biggest health threat of the century. And this is what made me decide to study climate change.
This is the fight of human beings on the planet. We're fighting for the existence of living things on the planet here. That's how important this is.
A lot of fairy tales have a creature that is bonded to its habitat, such as a nymph and a tree. I would say that's the exact same relationship people have with their planet. When we take a part of it, it takes part of us. So I ask of you, Why would you fight for climate justice? Why would you fight for life?